Welcome to Advertising and Design and Branding today. Today we're going to talk about typography. I'm going to give you kind of a brief history of how typography came to be, and hopefully you'll enjoy it. Think of typography as something that has personality. Um, it will make your piece feel like it's in maybe the 16th century, or maybe it'll make it feel like it's from the 80s or 90s or from the future. So basically, fonts turn words into stories. So typography does have personality. This makes you think of hippies. It's from the 60s. It's all pretty and colorful, and it's a real organic kind of font. So let's talk about different personalities that fonts have. Um, this one is the top left is uh, Times New Roman. That is a traditional font. This one is in bold, but the whole family is just considered a traditional font. I don't know if undergrads have to do their essays and reports and things like that in Times New Roman, but when you get into graduate school, if you should choose to go, you will be writing everything in a 12 point, not Times New Roman double spaced. That's just how the graduate school works, is everything is in that font because it gives it weight. It's traditional. There's no funny business going on. You are a straight shooter. Okay. So that kind of font is traditional, whereas Helvetica is stability. It's reliable. You can read it. You can see it from afar. It's just a stable font. And if you want people to think you're stable, you will definitely want to use something that looks similar to this. Then we have Futura, which is one of those easily read, but still it's got packs a strong personality. So if you want to make somebody feel like you are stable, but you are super strong and you're kind of a little bit of a rebel, maybe, that's the font for you. Friendly. When I see this particular font, which it's called Cooper, I think of gas stations. I don't know why, but it's actually called Cooper, as in Cooper Tires even uses this font. But it's real friendly. And so it's a nice, friendly, I'm not too serious, I'm not too strong, but I'm really super friendly and let's be friends kind of font. And this one is called Edwardian script. This is traditionally used whenever you're doing a certificate or if you're doing a wedding invitation. It's elegant. You can read it, but it's just saying I have so much class. So your fonts do matter. So let's talk more about the style and the feel. You can make something look like it is from a certain era of time. And I've lived a lot longer than you guys have, so I've seen some of these times that have come and gone. Space Needle, the one on the very far left, that is so mid-century modern. And then you've got the Space Needle, and you've got the colors that make you think of that era, the 50s, when everything was really cool and everything was really, really, really good at that time. So that's what this makes me feel. This one is something that looks like it's from the 60s and 70s. Good vibes. You can hardly read that, but boy, aren't they having fun. That's kind of that's kind of how it wants to make you feel, kind of like, oh, I'm so feeling so groovy, whatever. But those colors, if you use that kind of a style of font, typography, you're going to make people think back to the 60s and 70s. The last example I have here is very futuristic and Back to the Future, if any of you've ever seen those movies. And so that is something that makes me think of the 80s. It is a perfect example of the 80s. Great time. So let's talk a little more about typography. How did we even get started using all of these different fonts and things? Well, before we could write, we could only speak. Ancient man created magnificent images, and I'm not even going to stay on this one. I'm going to just show you the images. They created beautiful drawings on cave walls because they didn't have a language and they wanted to remember the successful hunt that they may have just had, or they maybe a hard time, a woeful tale of of ear hunt or whatever. So these were things to help them remember to tell their stories at night whenever they're sitting around the campfire. They tell their children about the big bull that they killed this time. They talk about all the different animals they've seen. All the drawings were prompts for speaking and telling the stories. So as time went on, we had the alphabet, and you can see this one that's bigger than all the others is still sticking pretty close to the cave drawings. You know, they've made them really quick and short and simplistic, but that A looks like a cow's head. And we've got a person here, and we've got water and a foot. All these different things are represented in almost a hieroglyphic type way. And then we can see as things went on, the Phoenicians, the ancient Greek, started getting closer and closer to what we recognize as our modern uh, alphabet. But it has roots in those cave drawings. Whenever we got our alphabet kind of sorted out and people were beginning to write things down instead of just having a cave painting, people wrote all of the books and everything by hand. There were there were people who did nothing but scribe onto paper to make Bibles. It was usually somebody who was really rich that was able to commission a book and to own a book. So the rich and the religious leaders had had these books, but the masses didn't. So in 1450, there was a man named Johannes, I can't even say that name, Gutenberg. He invented the metal movable type press in Europe, and that changed everything. So, to be fair, there was a movable type system in China that was made of mainly ceramics, and they weren't nearly as long lived as the metal ones that were in Europe. And China didn't share their inventions with anybody at that time, so um, they happened separately without the other knowing about it. So back to Gutenberg. So in 1450, and just think about that, that is before Columbus came to America. That was a good 40 years before Columbus. So the typefaces that they made were pretty simplistic. And they basically, what they did was they made each letter a separate block from metal. They would mold these and clean them up and make sure that they were usable and in the same shape. And they would put them onto these big wooden boards to write anything. But the really good thing about the printing press is before the invention, only the wealthy had any books and had any knowledge. They were the only ones who could read. After the invention of the printing press, suddenly everyone could own a Bible, which was, by the way, the first thing that Gutenberg printed was a Bible. Um, so everyone started having access to education, to knowledge. They didn't have to depend on what their king told them or their priest told them. They had knowledge themselves. The masses were always they were always very poor and they were prone to illnesses, but with the creation of movable type, they were able to pull themselves out of the desperate times that they were in. Remember, knowledge is power. In my opinion, the movable type was a bigger invention than even the web. I mean, the web the internet has built upon other inventions, but this one was the first one that actually gave power to the people. So I will get off my soapbox. I love the history of printing. I would just I just think it's a very interesting topic. Okay, so this is a typography cheat sheet. I am not going to make you learn all of these different things because there's just a couple of things I want to point out, but that for you to remember because they're kind of important when you're working with typography. But here are all the different parts. Every single thing has got a name. There's stems and hairlines and bowls and ears and teardrop terminals and things like that. But what I really want you to know is these things. Ascenders. There's the top of the letters. Let's just take the R for instance, because it's nice and square on the top and the bottom. Where it's there's the top and there's the bottom. That is called an X height. They just picked that letter. I don't know why they didn't pick a different one. But anyway, anything that goes above the X line, the X height, is considered an ascender. If it goes above, it is an ascender. Let me move this to make sure you can see that. So you can see that the H is an ascender, and this one is basically an ascender, but it's not full blown, but it's kind of a half ascender. Anyway, then a descender, anything that goes below the X height, like the Y and the P and the G and the P and the Y. Anyway, anything that goes below that line is considered a descender. Okay. Why are why do we call why do we call the people who invent typography foundries? Foundries are basically metal shops. They deal with metal. I mean, right now foundries pour little shapes out of metal to for gears and things like that. But whenever Gutenberg created his printing press, he had to turn to those people who were already making uh, wheel hubs and things like that for different things to create his type because he was not a metal worker. So he got foundries to make his type. So that got to be a business for them. There were printing presses cropping up everywhere, and they all needed the movable type. So the foundries were making this. It was a part of their business. So they are the creators of the actual movable type. Okay, another part of typography that you need to know is the word serif. A serif is whenever, like here on the R, it's got this little thing that sticks out. It has this little foot that has little things that stick out. Those are serifs on the P, on the H. All of those letters that have things that stick out is called a serif typeface. Sans serif means without serif. So it doesn't have any of those little extra pieces. It's all just straight up and down. There is no little curvy thing at the bottom. So typography style is talking about whether it's straight up and down, if it's thin, if it's thick. And this is considered an italic. People also call them oblique. So there are several terms for it, but that's what a style is. Now the font weight is how thick it is. Like you can have a really super thin typeface, a thin weight typeface, or you can have something super heavy like this one up here. So those are some vocabulary words that are helpful to know. So whenever they first started making, when Foundry started first making the movable type, they just basically had Roman, which is considered the basic typeface. It's not thick, it's not thin, it's not bold. Some people call it book, but it's Roman book, whatever the foundry happens to name it. And then, of course, the italic. That was all that they were doing because they just couldn't keep up with the demand. But in the 20th century, they were really enlarged with what kind of fonts they had. They went from just those two to condensed and expanded and outline and all of those kind of different typefaces. And now there are gazillions of typefaces. Now that we have computers, we have basically an unlimited choice of fonts. So there are some categories. There's old style, which you can see that that's kind of old. Some of the old style even has sort of a wavery line there. Modern is something you could see from probably the mid-century. That's a good example. The Elle magazine is definitely a modern style. There's slab, which is just big and heavy so that you can really emphasize something. Of course, there's the serif and the sans serif. There's script, anything that is a real fancy thing that you might see on an invitation. There's also display, which is sort of like a script, but it looks a little bit more pedestrian. It looks a little more day to day. Then we've got decorative, which can be, this is one typeface, but a decorative can be anything that's really, it kind of defies the description of any of these others. Then dingbats and ornaments. Now these are all dingbats. There's one that I like to use a lot. It's called Zaph dingbats, and it has all of these wonderful shapes. There's also web dings and wing dings and all kinds of different names, but it's not really a font. It's just a bunch of shapes that you can use in your typography. And ornaments are just these real good, nice looking curly cues that you might see an author choosing to have as a separation between chapters or subchapters in a book. Then the last one is proportional and monospace. Okay, proportional means that some of the spaces are not the same. Like you can see that this R is much closer to the T than, say, the P and the R. It's more proportional typefaces give you the appearance to the eye of the right proportions, whereas monospace gives you the exact same space for every single letter. There is no exception. They're spaced identical. So here are some more terms and definitions that I want to put in front of you. All of these definitions are in your workbook. So we have kerning and letting and widows and orphans, and I'm going to just go to the next thing to show you actual examples. So kerning is the space in between letters, and you have to be very careful with kerning because if you have too much space between letters in a word, you can change the meaning of your sign altogether. Yes, that's something that somebody took a picture of. They might have moved the letters themselves, but I want to get this shirt. Bad kerning can never be justified. So we were talking about justification earlier about the different alignments when we were talking about design. This is the reason I don't like justified because it makes your kerning bad. So there you go. Even people that are working on road signs and the paintings, whenever they do the things on the roads, they need to watch their kerning too because it just makes me ache to look at that. Letting. Letting is the spacing between the bottom of the X height to the next bottom of the X height. So a rule of thumb is that if you are using a 12-point type, which type is measured in points, not inches, if you are using a 12-point type, the rule of thumb is to have two more points of letting. So it would be a 12-point type over a 14-point letting. The reason they call it letting is because when they were doing the movable type, they would put a strip of lead in between the sentences in a paragraph so that it would have a little space so you could read it better. Because if you don't, some of the ascenders and descenders start kind of crashing into each other and it gets really hard to read. So leading is important. You need to have a bit of a breath in between sentences and lines. Now we're talking about something that's a real pet peeve for me, orphans and widows. What that basically means is that an orphan is one single word that's left on a line all by itself. What you need to do is to take one word from here and have it come over and be two words. Don't ever have less than two words on that very final line of a paragraph. And a widow is whenever you take that orphan and stick it on the top of another column. That's a widow. So don't ever leave one line here or one, this is the whole line, would be a widow. And don't leave one tiny little orphan word underneath by itself. Hyphenation is one that I will definitely ding you on. Don't use hyphenation. Don't cut words in half. Redo your paragraph in some way. In InDesign, there is a way to turn off hyphenation, and I'm going to show you how, and I suggest that you use it. So don't have, yeah, don't. Because sometimes things need to have hyphenation, but it doesn't need hyphenation here. Don't hyphenate. Okay, and we've already gone over the alignment and all that kind of stuff, so I'm going to just skip over that because you guys already know that. So this is going to be something that we're going to be facing in Illustrator. We'll be making a paragraph, and you make a text box, and there's this automatic text that just pops in there. You don't type anything, you make a text box, and suddenly it's full and you don't know where it came from. It's just one of those things that Illustrator does. And I leave it alone. I know there's probably a way to turn it off, but I leave it alone because it can give me an idea of what my text is going to look like. We call this Greeking because it is not Greek, but it's just a bunch of nonsense letters put together so that you can see the weight of a paragraph. I don't like doing this, but sometimes people will ask you to design something and let them see a proof before they even have the copy to you. So this is to give them the idea of what it's going to look like with copy, without copy, whenever you have no copy. Okay, some common mistakes. It's not good to set entire paragraphs in all caps because whenever you're texting and you are writing in all caps, people think you're shouting. And so just don't do that. You can use it in a small area, like using it in a subtitle or a title of something. A couple of words, not bad. But whenever you use it in an entire paragraph, it can turn people off. Um, if you want to call attention to something, don't don't use caps. Try a bold style or larger or a different font or color or whatever. Just don't all cap everything. Don't use center alignment in a paragraph. It is hard to read and you will not have your content passed on to your audience. And don't use underline. Underlines that you use that are automatic underlines in any of the things that you can use text in, they don't go down far enough, and they start interfering with things that are the descenders. So just don't use this underlining. Use a different way to call out that particular area, even if it's a highlight. Don't use underlining. And of course, again, don't hyphenate. Okay, typography hierarchy. I told you I was going to use this word a lot. So let's look at this particular poster. This one is pretty type heavy. There's some graphics here and there, but it is pretty type heavy. And if you look at it long enough, you start saying, okay, this must be about some kind of a concert. But wow, of stuff is going on. Just too much to really look at. So their message is being lost on me at least because it's just a little hard to read. Then we have something that it's still not the best design in the world, but at least things are called out. Like now we know that this is a music night, and it has the names of the people who are actually going to be there, which would be a really solid concert to go to. And it tells you, see, everything is aligned to the right here. It just makes it easier to follow down that path. It's all laid out for you. So hierarchy is super important with, especially with typography. So hierarchy, here's a very good way to explain it. And I'm going to move this over. Y'all may not be able to see this, but it's something that Zoom is doing to me. Okay, so the hierarchy, it's sort of like the lines are actually saying this. Hello, I'm important. And then the second level of the hierarchy, I'm also important, but I'm not as important as the item on top. And then here's I'm required reading, but not essential. I'm secondary information. I'm a bulleted text, and on and on. So this is the thing that you see first. And then you just go down the hierarchy of importance. And one final thing, do not use Comic Sans, period. It's not a serious typeface. You will not be taken serious as a graphic designer if you use Comic Sans for literally anything. So you should appreciate classic typefaces. I had a professor in design that he gave us like 5 fonts that we could use that were beautiful and classic, but very limiting. There are a lot of really good fonts out there, and there are a lot of really nice classic fonts, but sometimes it's okay to go outside of that classic, but do appreciate why they are classic. Okay, here are some different typefaces. So do appreciate these. Another don't is don't allow orphans and don't allow widows. So now we're going to do the lab. I'm going to open up another video so that you don't have to watch all these long videos. So I will see you on the lab side.